The woods are a welcoming place for those who enjoy hiking, camping, exploring, and all things outdoors. Most of the time, it seems people have a good experience while doing these things. But not everyone who goes out into the woods has a positive story to share. These hikers, campers, and explorers share their allegedly true creepy tales from being deep in the woods. If you have a story you would like to share on the show, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Now, let's get into these creepy tales that'll surely keep you up tonight. So a few months ago, I was hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of Western Maryland. We were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop we have done frequently when we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at a summit. This area of the trail had a few park benches, tables, and parking lots. We were sitting and talking and noticed a man just walking around the parking lot alone. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me was that he was in jeans and a button-down shirt. Not exactly hiking attire. We decided just to set off on the last 2-mile leg of the loop. This part goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and is cut off into a mountain bank. The end of the leg is the parking lot where your car is. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail and you have to walk a single file line. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turn to look at her and I see the same man right behind her, following her at a rudely close distance. I immediately got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have any pack or hiking gear and was not even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really spooked me too. So a bit more walking and he continues to follow her very closely. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe as a reason to step off the trail and let him pass us, in case he is only following closely because he wants to go at a faster pace than we are. She immediately catches on to what I'm trying to do and we pull over. He looks startled, and she says hello very politely. He just stares. This is when I notice that he is carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, he stands between us and passes us. We wait to give him some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slows down. We wait for a bit longer, and he gets to the furthest part of the trail that has sight lines to us, and he turns around, looking up at us. We decided that something feels wrong about this guy and we don't want to have to pass him again. So we turned around and walked back up towards the trail, where the park and tables were. A few minutes of walking up the trail and I look back and I see him walking up the trail too. He's following us. I tell my friend to walk faster. We book it up the trail and get to the parking lot area where we were before. We start to strategize and wait, deciding that we will wait to see if he comes back up the trail or not. There are more people around here, so we felt safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by and nothing. We were talking about how that could mean that he kept going on the trail and is long gone, or is waiting on the loop somewhere where it's more deserted. We see a couple come from behind the trail that we were on, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction that we are. We approached them and asked if they saw anyone on the trail. They told us that they saw a young man sitting on a rock halfway down. They described the man who was following us. We explained our interaction with them and the wife got kinda creeped out. The husband finally interjects and says we need to call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there, he had a knife and was carving the stick. Needless to say, we called a ranger. The nice couple walked the last leg with us to make sure we got to the car safely, and then even gave us their numbers in case we needed anything. The rangers then walked the trail, but there was no sight of them. I wish I knew where he went and what happened to him, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legitimate. My whole life, I've just sort of felt like spirits and the like have been drawn to me for some reason. Like they connect to my being for some weird reason. Just a little bit of background before I get into this whole ordeal. When I was around 11, I moved out of my old home, which had its own little set of ghost stories, and moved to a small town in an old trailer near the forest. Like, my backyard was the woods. When I moved there, I spent a lot of time back in those woods, chasing deer and squirrels. I was in love with those woods, but around a year after I moved in, things started to get creepy. While spending lots of time out in the woods, I was leaning against a fallen log and sketching in a journal when everything went silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Everything just went silent. The whole world stayed still for so long. I know this should have thrown up a bunch of red flags, but being a naive 12-year-old, I continued to sit there and sketch. After about 15 minutes of silence, I heard something crackle, like bushes being stepped on and broken. I looked up expecting it to be one of my 4 siblings, but I was met with this stare of this odd little girl in a tattered pair of overalls and rain boots. Now, this was private property, and no way in or out, so I don't know how she got there. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. "Hey honey, are you lost?" I asked as I set down my pencil and journal. She continued to stare at me and just stared there, blank-faced. "Hey, did you hear me? Where are your parents?" I called out to her again. Her whole demeanor changed and she seemed to flicker with static electricity as she released this blood-curdling scream. This 4, 6, 7-year-old with blonde pigtails just wailed. You would think that would set off birds and deer, but nothing stirred and her face went back to the absolute stillness it was. The scream had knocked me backward and I was slightly terrified. I watched her for a second and turned my gaze toward the trail for just a split second, and then turned back to find that she was gone. She was gone and so was my pencil and journal. I don't know what that was or what she was or where she came from, or where she went. But God, did she scare the hell out of me. I haven't seen her since and I rarely even explore the woods anymore now. I was about 10 years old or so when I first heard my dad tell the story. He began telling this story one evening while he had some friends over and they had been reminiscing about old times. Now, I must say that my dad used to drink and this story happened with his drinking buddies. This would have been in the late 70s and 80s. My dad was an avid hunter. On this particular evening, he went out with 5 of his buddies. The area they went to hunt borders National Forest Service known as Charlie's Creek, which is located in the extreme North Georgia mountains. This area was and still remains accessible only by 4x4 vehicles or ATVs. They meet back at the old Jeep Wrangler at dusk to start the journey out of the woods. None of them had any luck that day. They had some beers and headed out of the woods. The road was never paved and still has never been paved to this day. It is very rugged terrain. My dad says that they had not been driving but a few minutes when they heard a weird blood-curdling scream come from behind them. The noise shot shivers up his spine. He thought to himself maybe it was the beer that he had consumed and it was messing with his mind. About the time one of his buddies asked if anyone else heard that sound, another blood-curdling scream echoed throughout the valley. The driver came to a stop as they looked around the darkness to see whatever was making this skin-crawling scream. My dad said that the glow from the taillights revealed a set of glowing red eyes illuminating about 5 feet from behind the Jeep. My dad said it was a light-colored, if not totally white, frozen just staring at the men, staring back at whatever this creature was. One of my dad's friends let a growling scream to scare it off into the darkness. Instead of scaring it, this creature just mocked the same sound back with hesitation. The driver took off and the animal proceeded to follow. Dad said that about every 5 minutes the creature would scream, sounding just like the friend that screamed at it last. When they would have to brake, they would see its red eyes staring back at them. It never got closer than approximately 5 feet from the Jeep. Then, another one of the men let out a different sounding scream and the animal repeated it back at the same time. My dad said they all took turns making animal noises, and each time the animal would make a sound eerily similar to how they sounded. They were thinking at some point that this was a panther, but was confused on how it seemed to mock each man that hollered at it. And panthers are not native to this area, and also how would it keep up with the Jeep? When someone asked my dad to describe to compare the sound to something, he said it sounded like a woman in distress or a child in pain. After about 20 minutes of this animal following my dad and his buddies out to the deep dark woods, they reached pavement and civilization. My dad said that the driver had been driving about a half a mile or so and would stop when they saw the taillights reveal the animal had stayed behind them, as none of them had flashlights on them. Once the pavement got there, they hauled ass and got out of there as fast as they could. As they came to the house that was on the side of the road, their headlights revealed the man's silhouette that lived there was sitting in his rocking chair. My dad and all his buddies knew this man, so they stopped and stepped right in front of his house. As the man stood up towering over 6 feet tall, he clicked on his flashlight, shining it on this creature that was right behind the car still. It seemed unfazed. One of my dad's friends fired a shot from his rifle at the creature. It took off running while screaming one last scream up the bank beside this man's house into the darkness. The man asked my dad and the other men if they were alright and what in the world was with that thing. He said that he had been sitting on his porch listening to it for over 20 minutes trying to figure out what it was as it got closer to his house. He too had a rifle ready to shoot whatever was making that demonic sound. My dad said this man continued saying that he had never in his 70+ years heard anything like that creature. My dad only told this story a couple of times throughout the years, and it's always the same. The details never change. I know my dad would never lie about this. One of the men told me the same version later when I was grown too. I often wonder what this could have been, especially when I go into that area. So I'm 24 now, and at the time of this story, I was around the age of 18 or 19. Anyway, I'm from the UK and live in a town surrounded by forest and wooded areas. A few miles away from my home is this particular forest that I and my friends used to drive up to in the summer, to basically just hang out and smoke and, do things like that. There was a certain tree that we would sit in that had fairly low branches, so it wasn't too hard to climb. On one particular night, we drove up to this forest at around 2 a.m., and there was only 3 of us there that night, but it being a weekend, we were all up for it. So we pull up into the car park, get out of the car, and proceed to venture into the woods. After around 15 minutes of walking, we found the tree, climbed onto it, and began to chat and smoke. So 20 minutes passed by, and as we were all chatting away, all of a sudden I could hear something coming from the bushes, around 15 feet away from us. We all go quiet and listen. That's when it hit me that there was somebody walking around at the bottom of the tree. It was footsteps. Then, all of a sudden the footsteps just stopped. I couldn't see anything as it was so dark. We all sort of just looked at each other. Then, that's when whoever it was at the bottom of the tree started to breathe very heavily. We all just sat there in total shock, not knowing what to do when the person began to bang on the tree and scream off before running into the woods. We all jumped out of the tree and ran through the woods, not stopping until we got to the car. This story freaks me out to this day, and we never went back into those woods at night again. It's not the creepiest story you've ever told, but to me it was really creepy. When my best friend and I were about 14, we experienced the most terrifying but thrilling experience of our lives. Now, for anyone wanting to understand this, there are a few key details. We lived in a rural town in the middle of nowhere of Northeast. We had been friends since we were 4, and the thing that made us drawn to each other initially was the fact that we looked like siblings. The only difference was our hair. She had white blonde hair and I pitch black. We were imaginative, to say the least, so this was always one of our favorite things. We'd write insane stories about magic and destiny. Typical Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, preteen stuff, but a bit more intense. We'd never share our stories with anyone but each other. So when weird things began to happen, you can imagine that we were freaked out. It began in November when we were both 13. I lived in a neighborhood which had a fence at the end of the road which blocked off a gravel road. We, thinking we were just so cool, decided to see what was beyond the gate. That's where our ritual began. We'd reach the gate, look to one another and whisper, "Open," in Latin, and jump it at the same exact time. We imagined this contained whatever lay beyond it. The landscape, which was beyond the gravel road, was a large hill which had the line of forest at the top. This hill was steep as hell, and if you stopped and looked behind you, you could see the entire town. Anyway, our first time exploring the forest, we found the first of many messages. Burned into a cut-down tree was the word "lucid," an image of an eye, and what we assumed was the name, Akasha. As we got braver, we went deeper into the forest, further down the winding trails. We began to find more messages all burned into trees. East, west, forest, scream, this way, run, take the path, and the most memorable, half the light which burns twice as bright. We thought this was a big puzzle, something someone had left us to figure out. It would be summer by the time we got to the bush. That was 2 miles in. We came across a creek with a wood plank bridge to the other side. Immediately, we were so excited. It was like this place was built for us. I wish we never crossed that bridge. Once on the other side, that's when things went bad, and this wonder turned to an eerie fear. That's when the whistling began. I can't even believe I ignored it at first. It sounded like the moaning of trees, but now I'm sure it wasn't. Just beyond the bridge and up another steep hill was a hidden field. It was breathtaking, like something out of a fairy tale. But the trees on the other side looked like a villain's lair. We both agreed not to go beyond the field. It just felt off. The whistling would happen every once in a while, and all summer, it just never seemed to stop. It even went on into the fall of that year, always in the forest and always when we passed over the bridge. One day on our way back, we came across a new message, something we were sure we hadn't seen there before, and we had entered there just a few hours earlier. It was carved and not burned into a large oak which marked a bend in the trail. It said in sloppy, uneven letters, "It comes alive at night." This caught our attention. What was it? Who the hell carved it? The rest could almost be explained by hunters, but this just didn't seem to fit. Being the dumb 14-year-olds we were, we thought this meant, hey, let's go at night. We decided that night, at the stroke of midnight, we'd venture off into the hidden field. That night, despite the cold and despite our fear, we went. As usual, we followed our ritual and sprinted as fast as we could to the bridge. We were so determined. I don't think we noticed the stillness of the forest. Once we reached the field, the only thing we saw was the stars, but nothing which seemed like an it. That's when I made the dumbest decision I've ever made. I ran towards the other side, somewhere we hadn't seen in the light. I began to weave through the brush and twisting vines in the swamp-like water which neither of us was prepared for. We eventually reached a hill clear of the vines and water and began to slowly creep up the hill. We stood low and as quiet as possible. When we reached a point where we could see the top, my friend's hand shot out and stopped me from moving any further. She pulled us down lower. At first, I didn't see it, but once I focused in, my heart stopped. Standing on what looked like another gravel road was something that wasn't quite human, but wasn't quite an animal. It looked like a man in a top hat until you began to focus on the disturbing details. His flesh was so pale it nearly glowed. Hooked feet and, again, what looked like a coat and top hat. It had its back to us, so I couldn't see the horrible scene its face was, but I felt as though it was in a trance. That's when I finally heard it. The whistling. The same sweet tune. The same tune which played like a background song every day we entered the forest. That's when it turned. I've never run so fast in my life. I'll never forget those gaping eyes. That menacing, inhuman smile. We didn't stop until we reached my house, and that night we vowed to never go back again. It's been 2 years since we experienced this, and since then, we've taken different paths in life, but still touch base every once in a while. About a week ago, walking to my car, I felt the same trance I did all those years ago. The whistling began behind me, a tune which I suppressed for so long. The same sickly sweet notes were emanating from a small patch of woods next to where I was parked. I have never run to my car so fast in my life. I didn't remember till now that night was the only time my best friend and I ever did not do our ritual when passing the gate to leave. Part of me, no matter how impossible, believes whatever we saw that night was probably set loose by us. Nicholas Creek Wildlife Area is in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, just south of Plymouth. The area is 2 blocks of land divided by a county highway, with a parking lot and a big red barn on the south side of the road in the center of the property. The northern half is black mud-wooded swamp. I tried to explore it and I barely made it 6 feet in. The southern half has a several hundred-acre field around the parking lot with pine and oak hills surrounding it and ringing the area. The area has deer, pheasants, grouse, quail, rabbits, and trout. I will try to do my best to explain everything. In the beginning of September of 1998, I was 19. It was a sunny and high 60s day, which was rare in that area. I was 19 and took my 110-pound lab mix to Nicholas Creek for some small game hunting. It was about 8 a.m. when we arrived. We parked at the previously mentioned parking lot and walked south into the field. We got some rabbits and pheasants in the field, and I saw a pheasant running into the pine trees that ringed the field on the southwest corner. I went into the pines as my dog and I were in hot pursuit of the pheasant. We chased him through the pines, over the next hill, and shot him. When we got from a thick pine grove to an area with sparse old growth that blocked some sunlight into the rolling hills, I decided that we would make a wide sweep to the northwest and come into the other side of the property to make our way back to the parking lot. It was dead silent while we walked over the next hill. I saw a small stone-walled cabin with green moss on the roof and a 3-foot-high stone fence around it. In the valley of the hill, we smoked coming out of a chimney. I walked up to the front walkway by the stone fence. I looked at the door and only window on that side. I saw movement inside the cabin and smelled like it was food cooking. My dog was ready to go, and I figured that we were trespassing by mistake. We walked back to public land, finished our hunting, and went home. Over the next few weeks, I thought about that house and how odd it was. This was before mess shacks in the area for hermits. There were no roads or trails, and almost a mile from the road, the inhabitants would have had to get supplies from the outside world. There are not enough game, fish, and resources for everyone to survive year-round in that area. Later in September of 1998, I went back out with my dog in the same area. It was sunny, low 60s, steady, and light breeze. Wonderful weather to be outside, honestly. I went back to the same area that I saw the house a few weeks ago, and it was just the fence of stone. A stone foundation of the house and parts of the moss covered from laying on the ground. When I first saw the house, it looked old, but still used. Now it looked like it was over 100 years old and abandoned for decades. I did circular sweeps around the area and found no other human settlements. I walked directly north of the house and with the intent of trying to find something, but I ended up walking right into the field, where I could start hunting. I was using a very reliable compass. The hilly terrain started to end, and I was down the slope to the beginning of the field. There was a mix of forest and tall brush. The sun was slightly blocked by all the trees, but I could still see very clearly. I was about 100 yards from the field when I saw an opening in the woods, with sunlight shining through. I decided that this would be a good place to take a break, but when I entered, it was dead silent. No breeze, no leaves crunching, no birds. I stopped instantly when I entered the clearing and saw a 9-step staircase with green carpeting and polished redwood-stained banister in the center of the clearing. I took a step forward and the barrel of the shotgun that I was holding vibrated like a metal tuner, and I felt warmer. My dog would not enter the clearing. The staircase was clean and the redwood-stained banisters looked freshly polished. I just backed up and went into the field for a break. I swept through the area many times since I have not seen any other staircases. The house was still abandoned and in ruins. Our 13-year-old 110-pound Labrador Retriever mix died of cancer in May of 2002, and we had him cremated. I was 23 years old. My friend M, a tall male, and I took his ashes to Nicholas Creek and walked directly south of the parking lot, into the hills that overlooked the field, where he is now resting. I will call my friend M since we do not talk anymore and I do not know if he wants to be in this story. On the way back to the parking lot, we stopped at the spring that comes out of the side of the hill. The water is pristine and there is a cup to drink from it. It is a very tranquil and serene spot. At the spring, the hills are on the one side and the field is behind you and below you. A black mud marsh with a few trees was on the final side. This is deep, sticky, black, foul-smelling mud. On a fallen tree within a few feet of the spring was a child's school backpack that was opened. We assumed that somebody just forgot it there, until we saw a kid's sock about 10 yards into the mud swamp. There were no footsteps to the sock. Anything would have made footsteps, and no one could have thrown it that far. As we looked past the sock, about 10 yards, another sock was there. Another 10 yards we saw a shoe, and then another shoe, and then another 10 yards we saw a shirt. No footsteps in the extremely soft mud, and no way anybody could have thrown those clothes that far. I went to walk the 10 yards to the first sock, and after 2 steps in the muck, M had to pull me out. I was stuck past my knees, sinking and almost lost my boots. As I rinsed off in the creek, M shrieked and said that he saw a large black figure running back and forth about 50 yards out in the swamp. I heard nothing and doubted him at first until I finished cleaning off my boots and pants. I looked up and saw a bipedal figure with extra long fingers, legs, and arms, and a head that seemed pointed at the top. It was probably about 50 yards away. It looked to be at least 8 feet tall and running faster than any man I've ever seen through a mud swamp that would stop anything. I noticed that the figure was making wider and wider arches around us. He looked to be starting to encircle us, so I took my friend and we made it quickly back to the car. As I stood at the parking lot on a small hill, I saw the figure at the edge of the wooden marsh standing with its shoulders toward us. I went back in September of that year with my gun. The kid's clothes and backpack were still there, and there were no footprints in the swamp. I did not see the black figure, but did not like that I was being watched the whole time. I went back to the same area a dozen times over and over in the next 10 years, and I've never seen that figure again or the kid's clothes. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these allegedly true, creepy stories from deep in the woods, be sure to give this video a like and share it with your friends. It really helps me out a lot. If you're new to the channel, why not subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video? I upload them almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story you would like to share in the show, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. These were some really freaky stories. Personally, I love the woods and spend as much time as I can out in them. Luckily, I've never had any creepy experience like these folks have. If you're on the go, much like I am, and don't have YouTube Premium, you can now download all your favorite scary stories from the swamp on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else podcasts are. I appreciate you guys watching more than you could ever know. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, why not comment pineapple in the comment section down below just to confuse everyone who didn't make it to the end. Again, I appreciate all of your support and can't wait to see what 2019 holds for us. So far it's been pretty spooky. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.